Hello, and welcome back to Road to WILDS, a Monster Hunter Retrospective. In this episode, I'll cover the first game in the franchise's third generation of titles. As a result, it may be best to view the previous videos in this series, which can be done by clicking here. Now, with that out of the way, let's get on with the show. Monster Hunter Tri, the beginning of Generation 3 of the Monster Hunter series. In the West, anyway. While the first generation of games got the ball rolling, and the second generation refined and incrementally added new features, Tri takes a drastically different approach and more or less marks a soft reset for the franchise. In some respects, Tri has some of the highest highs for players, as well as possibly some of the lowest lows. But we'll get to all that later. Monster Hunter Tri was released on August 1st, 2009 in Japan, and a little less than a year later, in April of 2010 in North America, Europe, and Australia. Interestingly, if we look at the release date of the titles in Japan, we find that Tri was released in between Portable 2nd G, aka Freedom Unite, and Portable 3rd. It's always been interesting to me how the Monster Hunter franchise has jumped from one console family to another. According to a Forbes article from 2007, Capcom decided to develop Tri for the Wii due to high development costs for titles for the PlayStation 3, though it was allegedly considered being developed for the PS3 first. What if I were to tell you that Monster Hunter Tri is the best-selling third-party game for the Wii in Japan? You'd maybe think it's one of the franchise's best-selling games, right?
Well, you're wrong!
While Tri did well sales-wise for a comfy 1.9 million units sold, it pales in comparison to its contemporaries of Freedom Unite, Portable 3rd, and the follow-up Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate. Now, why is that, you may ask? Well, while I'm no expert on sales data, my hunch is that back in the late aughts and early 2010s, portable gaming consoles dominated game sales in Japan, and since at that time, most of Monster Hunter sales were in Japan, titles released on portable consoles were naturally going to have an advantage. All that aside, Tri still did well, and is Capcom's 67th best-selling game. With Monster Hunter Tri being the soft reset for the franchise that it is, I've decided to tackle the following questions. What new features and improvements does Tri bring to the franchise? What are some of Tri's flaws? And finally, what reasons would a fan have to revisit Tri today? My answer for these questions will be drawn from my prior experience with the title, as well as my recent playthrough, in which I went through the Moga Village quest to reach the credit screen. As a result, my answers will be based on my own subjective opinion. Now for a bit of my history with Tri. Tri holds a very special place in my heart. While I loved the PSP titles, what I really wanted was a new Monster Hunter released internationally that was on a home console. Well, I finally got my wish with Tri, and I was elated. Not only was I able to play the game on a big screen with a controller, no, not that one, but I was able to enjoy a completely new world and gameplay style from what I had grown accustomed to on the PSP years prior. I was also able to finally play online like I did back on the PS2 with the franchise's first game. While I can't remember a lot of specifics of hunting online outside of Jin Moran hunts, I do remember loving my time hunting online with my fellow hunters back in 2010. It truly was a great time to be a Monster Hunter fan in the West with Tri's release. And speaking of stuff that's great, let's go over some of the great things Monster Hunter Tri brings to the table. Yep, I'm listing swimming as the premier best new feature for Tri. And while I don't expect to convince the folks that don't like swimming and its combat in Tri, allow me to explain the reasons why I love it as a cornerstone addition to Tri. Swimming in Tri brings a whole new dimension to the formula of the franchise in Monster Hunter Tri. No longer bound to the X and Z axis, hunters can now explore and hunt in much more vertical 3D environments. Admittedly, at a slower pace. I mean, you are underwater after all. This brings a host of new environments and locales to, well, dive into. And it definitely opens new facets of the world that we haven't been able to see up until now. Fish and other monsters that we can only see from the surface are now able to be interacted with on their level. And the water maps are absolutely gorgeous. Tri's underwater areas exude a vibe like no other in the franchise. Maybe I'm just one of those weirdos who actually likes water levels in games, though. You can't talk about swimming in Tri and not talk about underwater combat. This is one section I can definitely share some feelings of frustration with the people who hated swimming in Monster Hunter. It can be easy to misjudge depth and how far you are from a monster while hunting in Tri while in the water. Depth perception. This definitely happened more than once in my playthrough. But with time and experience, I came to get better about judging the distance and angle of my swings while fighting underwater. I love the tactical nature of water combat. Because movesets differ slightly from their grounded counterparts, you may find that one weapon excels better in the water than on the ground, or vice versa. As a result, your weapon choice should not only come down to the elemental weakness of a monster, but the environment you'll be fighting them in for a majority of a hunt. For example, let's say the new monster, Royal Ludroth, spends about 50% of his time in the water and 50% of his time on the land. Well, you'd probably want to pick a weapon that you excel with in both environments. Whereas, with a monster like the other newcomer, Gobel, who I found tends to spend more time of the hunt in the water, you may want to stick to a weapon that you're more comfortable with using in the water. Of course, this all comes down to personal preference. For my playthrough, I stuck almost exclusively with Greatsword, and that very well may be because I found it to be a solid choice for both in and out of the water. While I did craft a lance in my playthrough, I just didn't have the money or resources to upgrade it along with the Greatsword. However, if I did, I believe I would have found it to be a better choice as a water weapon for me personally. At the end of the day, while I don't think swimming is an absolutely perfect addition to the franchise, and believe me, we'll go into some reasons why when we get to Tri's flaws, I do believe it is an excellent and natural progression to exploring and battling in the world of Monster Hunter. I can't wait to see what they do with it in future games. Wink wink. Like stated before, Monster Hunter Tri is a bit of a soft reset of the series up to this point. Do you have a favorite monster from previous games? Well, if it's not Rathalos, Rathian, or Diablos, I hope you weren't expecting to see them here. While we would see more returning favorites in Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, Ian, Los, and Dablos are the only returning monsters from previous titles. As a result, a large percentage of the roster are completely new monsters. This includes small monsters as well. Let's do a quick rundown of our new roster! Great Joggy is our Velocidrome of Generation 3. While he doesn't sport any elemental attacks, he's actually a pretty formidable opponent in the early game. Foggy, who appears later in the game, is Joggy's Cool Ranch flavored cousin. Kudupeko is this game's version of Jan Kutku. He's an early game wall for beginner hunters. Peko has the unique ability to mimic the cries of other monsters. He uses this to summon other large monsters in the area to sow chaos during hunts. He's also one of, if not the only, monsters that can heal itself outside of sleeping. Royal Ludroth is our first amphibious monster. Royal Ludroth hunts will likely be the first time a hunter faces off against a large monster in the water. Ludroth is what I would equate to Gypsaros in previous titles. Next we have Baroth. Baroth is a muddy tank that charges around the map, not too dissimilar from Tigrex. We then have Gobel, our next aquatic battle. Gobel kind of splits the role of Gypsaros with Ludroth in that he comes equipped with a status, paralysis, and his lantern can also flash and stun hunters. Giganox is another status-centered monster. Giganox is basically Tri's version of Kezu, except instead of thunder attacks, Giganox wields poison and its many welts to assist in battle. Barioth is Tri's answer to Nargacuga and Tigrex, sporting the same skeleton and sharing similar attacks. Only this time, ice. Hooray! Finally, we're on to Lagiacruz, the flagship monster of Tri. Lagiacruz, as well as Ludroth, and a few other monsters we'll mention, fall under the Leviathan category of monsters, all sharing a similar skeleton. It's interesting to me how popular Lagiacruz is, despite him not appearing in World and Rise. Just a few left. We have Uragan. Like Baroth before him, Uragan also sports a new skeleton in the form of the Brute Wyvern. Uragan is sort of the Gravios of this game. Agnactor rounds out one of the last of our Leviathan monsters. Agnactor is kind of a mix between Diablos with its ability to burrow, and Gravios with its fire element and magma armor that can make it quite durable if it's allowed to harden. We now arrive at the final boss of the village quest, Sideus. Sideus is one of the few Elder Dragons in Tri, and he's the only one we fight exclusively in water. Sideus is one of my favorite monsters, so forgive me if I gush about him for a bit here. Like Lagiacruz, Sideus uses the Leviathan skeleton, therefore he has many similar attacks to Lagiacruz. Sideus is sort of the Laoshan lung fight of Tri, being that it's this grand siege hunt of the game. However, unlike Laoshan, Sideus actually directly combats us. remember the first time I fought Cedeus. I was baffled, fascinated, intimidated, and awestruck all at the same time at the sight of this monster. What a strange, fearsome, yet majestic creature. Your first battle with Cedeus gives you time to bask in its grandeur as you tail it to its ultimate destination, where you inevitably square off. The music, the ruined environment, the monster, the pressure that has been building with the fate of Moga Village at stake make the battle with Cedeus one of the most memorable moments in Tri, if not the entire franchise for me. Let's talk about monsters that are in Tri, but I didn't fight during my playthrough. Devil Joe, the angry pickle, first makes his appearance in Tri. There are Elder Dragons, Jin Moran and Alatrion, to round out the roster, with Jin Moran functioning closer to a siege hunt like Lao Shan, and Alatrion being the Black Dragon of Tri. While the overall number of monsters is relatively small compared to previous titles, I feel Tri has some of the most unique and inspired designs of the series. While we may not see a decent portion of them past 3 Ultimate, monsters such as Barioth, Uragan, Baroth, and Devil Joe would go on to be popular mainstays after their initial debut in Tri. Let's go over the new maps featured in Tri. First, we have the Deserted Island. I love this map. It's up there with Forests and Hills from the first 2 generations for me as far as enjoyment and nostalgia go. You have lovely green open fields, some cavernous areas, a wyvern's roost, some beautiful coastal zones,
wow,
and last but not least, the gorgeous blue waters where the game first introduces you to swimming.
How are you? I am under the water. Please help me. Here too much reading.
I love the visuals and combat arenas on the Deserted Island, and I think I would probably rate it as one of my favorite maps in the franchise. Next is another favorite, the Flooded Forest. While I think its combat arenas aren't as enjoyable as the Deserted Island, I love the atmosphere and ambience of the Flooded Forest. Onto the Sandy Plains. As far as desert maps go, it's pretty good. There are decent combat arenas and some cool desert caves to explore. Oh, it should be noted that the Sandy Plains and Flooded Forests both make returns in Monster Hunter Rise, though they are a bit reimagined. Finally, we have the Tundra and Volcano. The Tundra is fine. There are some decent to good combat arenas, as long as you're not fighting Giganox in the caves. Yuck. Speaking of caves, they have an interesting few dark zones that encourage the use of a torch. Kinda neat. The volcano is the volcano. I feel like I have the fewest things to say about these zones over the entire franchise. I do like the forested and coastal zones before you reach the volcanic areas proper. I also like the narrow mining zone as you approach the peak of the volcano. For some reason, it just gives me memories of the winding staircase area with the mine flares and the Tower of Latria in Demon Souls. So yeah, Tri has an excellent assortment of new maps and monsters, some of which become staples of the franchise hereafter. I feel Monster Hunter Tri has some of the best presentation and atmosphere in the entire series. Outside of possibly Monster Hunter World, I haven't been wowed by a game in the franchise like I have with Tri. First, we have to talk about the music. Composer Tadayoshi Makino somehow surpassed the incredible Proof of a Hero theme with Tri's theme to One with Life. I still get goosebumps when it crescendos. And I stand by the Moga Woods / Deserted Island battle theme is one of the most exciting hunt tracks ever used in the series. The galloping percussions and triumphant horns are audio fuel for a weary hunter to press on. I mentioned it earlier when talking about Sideus, but the themes played during both parts of its hunt are so grand and majestic. I think one major reason I like Sideus so much is because of his themes. Now onto the visuals. Tri doesn't reinvent the wheel with his visual fidelity, especially with it being on the Wii. However, it is a noticeable improvement from the PSP predecessors. Textures look more detailed, and there's a noticeable increase in poly count for environments, objects, characters, and monsters. As for the art style, Tri has a very relaxed and somewhat washed out aesthetic, almost like it's been sitting out in the sun for a little too long, so its color is a little faded. While this may sound like a criticism, I actually think this art style really works, and I find it quite appealing. Apparently not everyone loved it, as the faded aesthetic is changed in 3U to a much more vibrant and saturated color palette, which is also nice in its own way. Thankfully, the series avoided the more realistic art style once again. In my eye, the more stylized approach to Tri's aesthetic gives it a more timeless look, and it doesn't show its age as much as a game trying to emulate realism on the hardware of its time. But at the end of the day, Tri has an amazing ambience, atmosphere, and energy that make it a feast for the eyes and ears. Tri marks an interesting place in the franchise's life. For all the amazing features and additions mentioned above, there are arguably just as many things that hold it back from being the best it could be. While I would say none of these are deal breakers, some of them are unique problems to this game, and others are issues previous games in the series solved that have come to rear their head again in Tri. So what kind of flaws exactly? Well, let's get into it. Now, I know what you're thinking. TK, you were just praising how great swimming was in Tri just earlier. You're right, and while I think swimming and its combat are overall great additions to the game, there are plenty of fans who think otherwise. Just a quick search on 4 to 8 year old threads on the subject brings up points as to why people didn't really like swimming. So what did people dislike about swimming? Well, from my recent playthrough, I can definitely echo the frustrations of depth perception while fighting in the water. It can be a bit more difficult to line up a swing on a submerged monster. I had plenty of moments where I thought I had lined up a shot only to have it come up short. Another common complaint I saw was that water combat took the already slow and clunky Monster Hunter combat and made it even slower and clunkier. And I'm of two minds about this complaint. On one hand, I can appreciate the more methodical combat, but on the other hand, I can understand how people would feel restricted and weighed down by the slower and less responsive aquatic combat. The final complaint I'll cover about swimming is the lack of an evasive maneuver with invincibility frames. And I get it. I got burned on my playthrough the first time I fainted because I thought I had iframes on my sprinting aquatic dodge. I tried, I might be stunned. Yep. Okay, you can't Superman, oddly enough, you can't Superman dive when you're in the water. Okay, Laggy Crew's still got some sauce. Yeah, it sucks, but it's kind of a mistake you hopefully learn from and try not to let happen again. As a bit of a tangent, one of the best pieces of advice I can give for players complaining about cheap or unfair situations in the Monster Hunter series at large is to do your best to never be in a situation where cheap or unfair situations can arise. Now, I realize that's kind of a verbose way of saying, get good, but I think I can maybe explain it a little better. In Monster Hunter, especially some of these older games, the knowledge of knowing and avoiding cheap and unfair situations can do more for you than a strong weapon or tough armor. For example, knowing Diablos' roar while he's enraged can leave you open to eating a really dirty two-piece from the Twin Horn Terror is actually extremely valuable. Chip damage, holy crap. Nope. Block that. Because that's where he gets you with the cheap stuff. As a result, having a weapon that can block, and successfully blocking the roar, or high-grade earplug, can keep you from getting into that really cheap situation. Yeah, the whole lack of a dodge with iframes opens you up to more cheap situations in an aquatic hunt, but it's also a wake-up call for a hunter to avoid being in situations like that in the first place. So, to conclude, while I'd like to think I adapted to the jank of fighting in the water in Tri, I can see why others may not like or acclimate to it like I did. Ooh boy, this is an interesting one. So to preface, when I started my playthrough of Tri in preparation for this video, I did not look up the monster roster, and a lot of my memory of Tri from the late 2000s kind of blends with 3U. I forgot just how small the roster in Tri is. There are a total of 17 small monsters and 18 large monsters in Monster Hunter Tri. Just as a comparison, Freedom Unite, the last game released in the West, had 59 large monsters, close to 3 times as many. Now those numbers aren't everything, because of those 59, a large portion are variants or subspecies, but still. Weapon trees and armor selections are quite limited due to the small monster roster, especially compared to previous games. The amount of maps to hunt on is also quite a bit lower from previous games, with only 5 major hunting locations in the form of the deserted island, flooded forest, sandy plains, the tundra, and the volcano, excluding arenas and boss areas. While we never got Monster Hunter 2 in the West, Tri feels like Monster Hunter 1 again in a lot of ways. And sadly, I'm not just talking about the low volume of content. Like Monster Hunter 1, Tri's online village, Loklok, is inaccessible due to it requiring an online connection to the game's online servers, which unfortunately shut down back in 2013. And don't worry, later in the video, I'll get to how there is a workaround to this thanks to some very dedicated Monster Hunter Tri fans. But without some tinkering, you are stuck with the offline village quests and therefore low-rank content in Monster Hunter Tri. In some ways, Tri feels like 2 steps forward and 1 step back in regard to how it furthered the franchise. You can't talk about the lack of or missing content in Tri without addressing the elephant in the room, the missing weapons. Okay, so here we go. Brace yourselves, everybody. This is the bombshell that is Monster Hunter Tri. So we're gonna forge weapons. Let's see all the new weapons they added to Monster Hunter Tri. Oh. From what I understand, based on my research on articles, interviews with the game's developers, swimming and its combat took up so much of the development time that they were only able to get a fraction of the game's weapons playable in time for Tri's scheduled release. So what weapons got cut? Well, it's mostly the newcomer weapons from Generation 2, those being the gun lance, bow, and hunting horn. Dual blades were also cut, oddly enough. The one notable weapon that was included from Generation 2 was the longsword, because of course it was. And it's an absolute beast in this game, with it now having the ability to level up its spirit blade from nothing to white to yellow and finally to red, thereby increasing its damage output. Bowguns are also very interesting in Tri. Now, if you've watched my previous videos or my playthroughs, you know I don't really touch on bowguns much, but I think the changes are pretty notable for Tri here. Gone are the subcategories of light and heavy bowguns. You can now build your own bowgun. There are parts you can mix and match to your liking, with each part having its own weight value. This gives you access to what is essentially medium bowguns. Sort of how you have light, medium, and heavy/fat rolling in Dark Souls. As to how they perform, I can't say. I rarely touch the things, but I would assume they are just as strong as the bowguns tend to be in most games of the franchise. That is pretty strong. Thankfully, these omissions are rectified in 3U, with all previous weapons making the return. Sadly, or not, the bowgun appears to be back to how they were in previous games, with there being only light and heavy types. Gone is the Dark Souls weight system bowguns. Bowgun users, was this a fun feature in Tri? Let me know in the comments if you liked or disliked it, and if you'd like to see the bowgun weight system return. Because I like to do my list in at least 3 entries, here are a few minor nitpicks that kind of bother me just to round out the cons section. And peppered in will also be some nice changes, just so we can end this section with some positives too. It immediately irked me that they took out the fast travel feature that was present in Freedom 2 and in Freedom Unite and Poke Village. While there are a few places to travel in Moga Village, it still would have been nice to be able to zip from my house to the Moga farm. Gone is the training school from previous games. This itself isn't a drawback, but what replaced it is very awkwardly implemented in Tri. The arena, or Coliseum, takes the place of the training school in Tri, but to participate in it is very odd. You access the arena from the game's main menu. Upon completing arena quests, you're able to import your rewards into your save file. While I'm not sure why they changed it to this roundabout method compared to how they handled this training school in past games, it did lead to one interesting feature: split screen co-op. For the first time, and maybe only time, you and a buddy can share a screen and hunt in the arena together. As a result, texture quality takes a hit, I guess to compensate for having to display 2 different game screens. I wasn't able to do any co-op in my playthrough, but it's definitely a fascinating quirk about Tri. While I haven't gotten to 3U yet, from what I recall, its arena quests are accessible similar to how the training school functioned in previous games. You just talk to an NPC. Like Monster Hunter 1, again, Tri has a very slow introduction. We can assume this is the game's way of easing players into the world, gameplay, and mechanics. This is fine in principle, but I think Freedom 2 and Unite had much better introductions to their world, in that we had the option to sidestep a lot of the hand-holding that Tri does. About the first hour or so of the game is an unskippable section walking players through basics like combat and carving, up to new mechanics like swimming and the Moga Woods. All the while, pop-up tutorial messages from the Moga Chief and his son are liberally sprinkled throughout to interrupt the pace. Now, I may be making it sound worse than it is, and in truth it's not that bad. It's just kind of jarring going from the free-flowing and hands-off introductions of Freedom 2 and Unite to the railroaded and hand-holdy introduction of Tri. While Tri's flaws are arguably the most glaring in the series, I think it says a lot that the things it does right almost eclipses the things it does wrong. But with Tri's flaws out of the way, let's go over some reasons fans would have to revisit the game today. Monster Hunter Tri is blessed to have the dedicated fans it has. As mentioned earlier, Tri's official servers went offline back in 2013, and with them, access to the online and high-rank content of the game. What's notable is the online town in Tri, Loklak, is exclusive to Tri, wherein 3U, the online town featured there, is Tanzia. This is a shame because Loklak is a really cool and unique city, and without the ability to play online, there's no way to see it again. Is what I would say if the community of fans for Tri didn't step up to the plate to bring back the ability to host private servers. I will link the project's timeline in the description if you want to follow the history behind it. While I was not able to get it working for the playthrough, it apparently works on both emulators and original hardware. So if the quirks and oddities of Tri look like fun to you and you want to continue onto high rank and play online with others, give this project a look. It's really impressive and goes to show how fortunate the Monster Hunter community is to have fans as dedicated as this. I almost considered putting this section in the flaws part of the video, but because you can play with more traditional controllers, I'd say it makes it a unique feature as opposed to a glaring drawback. Because Tri was released on the Wii, of course it had the ability to use the Wii Remote and Nunchuck with their motion controls. Now, I used a traditional controller attached to a Wiimote for this playthrough. This one, to be exact. As you can see, it's a bit small for my hands, but I made do. But if you were an absolute mad lad, you could use the Wii Remote and Nunchuck control scheme to play through Tri. Here's some footage of me flailing about trying to consistently do a horizontal to upswing combo with the greatsword. It's not pretty. Now, admittedly, I did have a phone attached to my head, so it's probably not as finicky as I'm showing here, but I'm glad I stuck to the regular control scheme for my playthrough. One other noteworthy control feature is you can switch the attack inputs back to the right analog stick inputs like they were in Monster Hunter 1. Now this I did mess around with, and while it was kind of novel, I kept the playthrough with the button attack inputs, mostly for my sanity. It is an appreciated relic to have back though. This point may not age the best if Wii consoles become wildly collectible in the future, but as of the making of this video, you can pretty easily obtain a Wii for a reasonable price. And Tri isn't a difficult game to track down for a reasonable price as well. Compared to the PSP titles, I'd say it's a bit easier to acquire a Wii and try to play on original hardware, though your mileage may vary there. Double that with the ability to play Tri on the Wii U, and you have a couple of different ways to play on original hardware. The emulation side is also pretty good. While I haven't used the Dolphin emulator, I've heard it's quite effective at outputting games with even better performance and visuals than on original hardware. So, whether you're playing on original hardware or emulating, Tri is a pretty easy game to get your hands on. Before we conclude, I wanted to cover some miscellaneous bits of Tri that I couldn't really fit into any of the other sections of the video. Tri did bring us a new weapon type. It's not one I particularly like, just aesthetically, but the Switch Axe debuts in Monster Hunter Tri. What's weird about the weapon's debut is you can't build it right out of the gate. In my playthrough, I was only able to unlock the Switch Axe after I completed the village quest to hunt a Baroth. Look how they got this doohickey. Feast your eyes and I figured out the plans for a new type of weapon. Okay, here it is. It's the Switch Axe. Yeah. I don't think we'll be using this, but there it is. Amazing. Yeah, okay. Interesting they make you wait. How weird. Longsword is also restricted at the beginning of the game, oddly enough. Speaking of the longsword, one noteworthy longsword you'll receive is the Barbarian Blade from the Argosy captain after defeating Sideus. What's the Argosy, you ask? Well, it's the trading ship that you can exchange various trade-worthy items, be they mundane standard trades, or the more unique and valuable rare trades. Some interesting items that you can get from the Argosy include small furniture pieces that you can display in your home in Moga Village.
Very nice.
Most of the trade items are obtained by hunting in the Moga Woods, as opposed to standard quest hunts. This is a fun way to encourage hunters to break up the quest grind and relax with some risk-free hunting on the deserted island map without any faint restrictions or time limits. While feline comrades are gone for Tri, they are replaced with the Shakalaka helper, Cha-Cha. Back when I played Tri in 2010, I remember wishing we could still use felines as hunting buddies, but I eventually grew to kinda like Cha-Cha, especially after seeing his sick dance moves. Cha-Cha is an interesting spin on the feline comrade system in Freedom Unite. You can pretty freely customize Cha-Cha's performance with various masks, dances, and abilities that can make him function however you'd like. What's fun is that Cha-Cha's personality changes depending on what mask he has on. For example, if Cha-Cha wears the Ancient mask, he'll start acting like he's an old-timer. In my playthrough, I really liked the Fluffy mask on Cha-Cha. This let me use his special ability to locate monsters on the map. I really appreciated this since I was unable to get any Psycho Serum for the entirety of my playthrough. Finally, let's talk about some of the new moves added to previous weapons. While I won't cover all the weapons, I wanted to highlight the weapons I primarily used in my playthrough. The Greatsword gains access to what I call the paddle swing by pressing X after a vertical slash. Pressing X and a direction on the left analog stick again will give you access to the strong charge slash. At least that's what it's called in later games. While I don't know the damage values, I assume it is stronger than the regular charge slash. The Lance has a couple of new abilities. Holding block and low thrusting will allow you to do what the manual calls the block advance. This allows you to lunge forward with your shield raised, and it's a great way to close a little distance while blocking. You also get a shield bash follow-up, which does some stun damage. And if you hold block and press A, you'll perform the newly added cancel thrust. Both of these moves debut here for the Western games, and they will go on to be core moves for the Lance in future games.
Stab, stab, stab.
Last but not least, we have the Longsword. While I talked about it briefly before, its new spirit leveling system, what I neglected to mention was the move that allows that level up to occur, the Roundhouse Slash. This attack occurs at the end of the Spirit Slash combo, and landing it on a monster causes your Spirit Blade meter to level up. I've gotten so used to the Roundhouse Slash being at the end of the Spirit Slash combo that when I used Longsword in Freedom 2 and Freedom Unite, it felt very strange not having it. Monster Hunter Tri sailed some choppy seas with its lack of weapons, difficult to master swimming controls, and low monster roster. But I think what it set out to do still elevates it above these flaws. Tri is one of the most memorable games in the series for me because it was brave to chart a new course into the unknown when it could have just as easily stayed in the calm and safe shadow of its predecessors. It was really ambitious to take the series into this aquatic realm. Thankfully, Tri's follow-up, Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, refines and adds to what Tri established while fixing many of Tri's most glaring issues. Will 3U be another peak of the franchise? Find out on the next episode of Road to Wilds, a Monster Hunter Retrospective. And thank you for watching.